see under the surface? Because options markets are really being used to tell us a different story than what you see on the surface.
I think you described VIX perfectly. VIX is telling us what global investors are viewing the U.S. market, and today's a great example. Big rally in the U.S. market, about a 1% move, but VIX down 5%. That's a big move in VIX. So what are investors telling us? First of all, with the returns of the year, market up roughly 17.5% or so, retail investors have an incredibly bullish sentiment. We haven't seen that since first quarter of 21. So what's happening now is the desire and the need to hedge that position. How do I protect that gain that I've had this year? VIX is a perfect way to do that. We've seen volumes in VIX options trading up about 40% from what we've been averaging in the years before. So a lot of interest in hedging.
It's incredible because you look at the SVIX, for example, an ETF that essentially goes short VIX, and it has just soared. It's about 10 notches above what the average is for the year. There has just been an influx of products here to bet against the VIX. What is that telling you in terms of the fear that's under the market?
VIX, the volatility of volatility, VVIX, so we measure vol-2, tells us, though, that the cost of using VIX puts and calls is elevated. It is rising. So the cost of that VIX exposure is on the rise, which brings another trade in, and that is trading credit and premium harvesting in just VIX itself. So there's a lot of interest in and around the uncertainty in the market, and that shows up in many different ways.
Speaking of volatility products, a lot of people have said that volatility has become kind of its own asset class in many ways. Do you see as much demand for volatility as an asset class now that you see traditional securities like treasuries, like stocks, trading in such a volatile fashion?
The measure of the trade and what we take from a volatility surface, we could look at VIX over time. We can go months and months out in the future. The use of VIX, the utility in looking at what the market perceives over time is probably the most valuable. Not the moment in time, but what the sentiment is out over time. So back to the original question. Trading in and around those differences is very appealing for investors, and we see more and more engagement, again, with those very, very high levels in VIX options trading.
I want to broaden things out a little bit here and ask you about other products that you're looking to launch. What do you have coming down the pipeline?
Probably the most recent, and it's relatively new, is the one-day VIX. And that is our ability to measure exactly what's happening in the shortest term, the shortest cycle. Like, what's going to happen tomorrow? What's the sentiment on investors for tomorrow? That's an incredibly powerful measure. That's our newest. And then we're getting into a dispersion measure. So what does that mean? The concentration that we've seen in the rally this year is really the megas. What has happened in these big stocks? You just mentioned NVIDIA. All eyes on NVIDIA after the close. The concentration of those 7 big classes, for example, how does that relate to the other 493 stocks in the 500? And that relationship, as it changes, we will measure that, and that gives a lot more information for investors.
Ed, 9 acquisitions in 3 years. If you're an investment banker anywhere in Wall Street, you're asking what you're going to do next. Are you looking at more M&A to expand the strategy here?
Well, we can. We're pretty flexible balance sheet. We always like to maintain a flexible balance sheet. There's nothing we have to do. We like to be in jurisdictions that are open for competition, and we like to be there in scale. And that's really what our acquisitions have been in the past. Speaking
of cryptocurrencies, a lot of folks are talking about your interest in crypto, given that the crypto markets are burgeoning more in the futures market than they are in the spot markets. You had filed an application for Fidelity to register a Bitcoin ETF. Where do you stand in this process, and do you still hope to go forward, given some of the initial pushback with the SEC?
We're very, very hopeful. We've filed years ago for the first ETF, and that was VanEck, and it was years and years ago. So we're optimistic that the SEC will get comfort around their ability to surveil. Hopefully now, with a trusted market operator trading in the spot and now margin futures to begin in the next couple months, we can be that trusted source for the SEC to surveil and to look into the day-to-day trades and exposures. We understand the SEC is out for investor protection, but there is a demand for the democratization of crypto exposure, and ETFs are a wonderful wonderful tool.
From where you sit, what does the SEC need to see in order to get comfortable with this?
Much better question for the SEC. I don't know. We think we can satisfy much of the query, much of the interest, and really look out for investors. That's what we do around the globe. We operate 26 markets. We're really good at working with regulators and sharing information. Very, very important.